Amelia pulled her worn scarf tighter around her neck and fished out her phone from an old canvas bag. A message from the cleaning company popped up with a red exclamation mark. Urgent. VIP client requests immediate cleaning of Penthouse 49C, Empire Heights. Be there before 9:30 a.m. Double pay. Who's available? She blinked. It was 9:02. Empire Heights was just 4 blocks away. She quickly replied, I'll take it. Then she zipped up her coat, pulled on her beanie, and hurried into the cold New York morning. Specks of snow still clung to the subway steps. One of her shoelaces had come undone, but there was no time to stop and tie it. She needed the money. Rent was due in a week. If she missed the deadline again, the landlord would change the locks. And the January cold showed no mercy to those without a roof. Empire Heights loomed like a marble monolith against the gray sky. Gleaming glass walls, private security, facial recognition systems, and the faint scent of peppermint oil wafted through the lobby. Amelia stood small in the lavish space, hugging her cleaning kit tightly. Everything she wore, from her faded coat to her worn gloves, seemed painfully out of place. Still, she lifted her chin and smiled at the front desk clerk. I was called to clean Penthouse 49C. Name? Amelia Rose. Please wait. After a few moments of typing, the clerk gave a slight nod and gestured toward the private elevator. 49th floor. Do not open any doors besides 49C. The metal doors slid open smoothly, and Amelia stepped into the quiet elevator, so silent it felt like a morgue. The entrance to 49C opened only from the inside via fingerprint access, but someone had left the door ajar. Amelia gently pushed the glass door. A cool draft brushed her face, freshly polished mahogany, the faint scent of lavender oil. The air was too still, too perfect. The living room was twice the size of her entire apartment. The ceiling rose nearly 13 feet. An oversized abstract painting hung on the far wall, streaks of crimson brushstrokes bleeding across a jet-black canvas. No voices, no footsteps, only a sound, very faint, but enough to send a chill down her spine. A cry. Amelia followed the sound carefully, soft sobs, then silence, then the broken rhythm of tears again. She walked down a hallway lined with pale gray carpet. Every door was closed. At the end was a heavy oak door unlocked. Her heart pounded as she placed her hand on the knob. She knew she shouldn't open it without permission, but the crying, it couldn't be ignored. She pushed it open. A bedroom, large, dim, eerily pristine. The king-size bed was untouched, the blackout curtains sealed tight, and in the corner next to the built-in wardrobe was the source of the sound. She crouched down. Light from the hallway cast a dim glow across the floor. She reached for the wardrobe handle and gently opened it. A little boy, about 5 years old. Messy brown hair, puffy, pale gray eyes rimmed red. Tears streaked down his cheeks. He wore dinosaur pajamas, no shoes, and clutched a frayed teddy bear in his arms. He didn't speak. He just stared at her like she wasn't real. Amelia sank to her knees but didn't move closer. She pulled a handkerchief from her pocket and held it out gently. Are you okay? Are you hurt? Her voice was soft, like cotton. Not the tone she used for customers. This was the one she had once used for herself as a child. The boy shook his head. His lips trembled. A choked sob escaped. Amelia stayed still, extending the handkerchief. I won't come in, but I'm here. If you want to wipe your tears, you can. Silence. Then the boy reached out, took the cloth. That simple gesture made her heart clench. She saw herself years ago curled up in a dormitory corner, crying alone on her birthday when no one came to pick her up. She gently dabbed the boy's tears, slow and careful. My name's Amelia. What's yours? Lucas. That's a beautiful name. Want to come out? I know how to make cocoa milk. Lucas hesitated, then nodded. He launched himself into her arms, small hands clinging tightly around her neck. Mommy? The word struck Amelia like a lightning bolt. She froze, but she didn't let go. She simply held him tighter and whispered, It's okay. I'm here. She had no idea how long they stayed like that. Could have been seconds. Could have been forever. Until a deep, icy voice echoed from the doorway. What are you doing with my son? Amelia turned sharply. A man stood there tall, upright, black hair neatly trimmed, a flawless gray suit, a chiseled, unreadable face, eyes sharp as steel. I, I'm sorry, I heard crying. The door was open. You're with the cleaning service? Yes. And you thought your job included rummaging through private rooms and hugging my child? Amelia stood, still holding Lucas in her arms. I didn't rummage through anything, but your son, this little boy, was scared. A child shouldn't be crying inside a closet. The man looked at the boy. Lucas still clung tightly to Amelia's coat, face buried in her shoulder, silent. He tightened his grip on his briefcase, eyes scanning them like they were a system glitch needing correction. I'm Ethan Hawke, and this is my son. You may leave now. Amelia set Lucas gently on the bed, crouching to his eye level. I have to finish my work now, Lucas, but you're strong, okay? Lucas bit his lip and nodded, eyes brimming with tears. Amelia stood tall and looked Ethan in the eye one last time. If you truly care about your son, then please ask him why he was hiding in that closet. Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked out. The door closed softly behind her, no sound, but something inside Amelia cracked. What she didn't know was that behind that door, Ethan Hawke hadn't moved. His hand had loosened on the briefcase strap, and Lucas, after months of silence, finally spoke. She's more like a mom than my real one. You're watching Soul Stories, where every story whispers of love, healing, and hope. Let us know which city you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and be a part of our journey. Now stay with us. The story is just beginning. Ethan Hawke had never been the type to soften easily. He ran a real estate empire, oversaw hundreds of employees, and signed off on multi-million-dollar deals. With a schedule booked 6 months in advance, every minute of his life was calculated in dollars, not meant for disruption, and certainly not for a cleaning girl who had stepped beyond her duties. The moment Amelia left the penthouse that morning, Ethan called the management company. The girl named Amelia Rose, cancel her contract, permanently. His voice was firm, cold as steel, no hesitation. But what he couldn't shake was the image of his son Lucas burying his face into that girl's shoulder, whispering, "Mommy," with a trembling voice Ethan hadn't heard in over 2 years. That night, Lucas refused to come out of his room. Ethan cracked the door open and saw his son curled up inside the wardrobe, just like that morning, just like so many times before. The boy's thin frame cast a long shadow across the cold floor. The frayed teddy bear still clutched tightly in his arms. Ethan stood in silence. He was a man who could make the entire southeastern real estate market tremble with a single announcement. Yet before this small child, he couldn't bring himself to say a word. He raised his hand to knock on the closet door, then let it fall. The same hand that had signed billion-dollar contracts now hung useless, unable to reach out and hold his own son. The next morning, Ethan changed his mind. Not because he was softening, but because, for the first time in months, he saw loneliness in his son's eyes, as if he were looking into a mirror. He called the company again. Send her back. 3 days only. I need the boy stable. Nothing more. His voice was hoarse, weary, like he was trying to escape something thudding wildly in his chest. Amelia returned later that afternoon. Still the same petite woman in a faded coat, carrying her old cleaning kit, eyes calm and deep like a lake after a storm. Ethan didn't say much, just nodded toward the hallway, then returned to his office. But Lucas didn't stay quiet. The moment he saw her, he ran straight to her and wrapped his arms tightly around her waist, not saying a word. But the hug alone was loud enough for Ethan to hear something shatter inside, even from his office. 3 days turned into a week. Amelia worked quietly as if nothing had ever happened. She didn't ask questions or overstep. She simply appeared when Lucas needed her, no more, no less. When he woke up from a nightmare, when he skipped breakfast in silence, when he hid under the table after hearing a loud door slam, Ethan watched. Not because he didn't trust her, but because he couldn't look away from what was unfolding before him. Lucas, his son, began to laugh. For the first time in 2 years, the boy laughed aloud when Amelia used a sharp voice to eat toast. Laughed when she hid the teddy bear in the oven and called it a surprise party. Laughed when she pointed at the clouds and said, "Do you know why clouds float? Because they're looking for friends too. Ethan, standing from afar, felt his heart squeeze just a little more with each moment. He had hired therapists, child psychologists, play coaches. None of them had gotten Lucas to laugh like that. But she, a cleaning girl with no degrees, no fancy credentials, no designer suit, did it like it was the most natural thing in the world. One evening, after Lucas had fallen asleep, Ethan stepped out of his office and found Amelia drying a glass in the kitchen. He hesitated before speaking. "What did you study before doing this job?" Amelia looked up, slightly startled but not flustered. She set the glass down and replied in a voice as soft as wind. "Early childhood education. I used to dream of becoming a preschool teacher." "Used to?" "My foster mother had kidney disease. I dropped out to work and helped pay for her treatment. She passed away, and I haven't gone back since." She said it without lowering her head, without shame, as if life had forged a kind of courage in her, the kind only found in those who had lost enough to stop asking for pity. Ethan stood silent. He looked at her like someone staring at a door they'd been too afraid to open. "You're very good with children." "I don't plan to be a mother to anyone." She smiled faintly, but there was something deep and dark in her eyes. "I just used to be a kid who cried and no one came." The words hit him like a punch to the chest. Not just the words, but the look in her eyes when she said them. That wasn't the gaze of a 25-year-old woman. That was the gaze of a child who had once waited by a broken window for someone who never came. And Ethan, no matter who he was, couldn't help but see how much she and Lucas were alike. The next day, Ethan didn't go to work. He canceled an important meeting, a move that shocked his assistant enough to ask 3 times if she'd heard correctly. He didn't explain. He just wanted to stay home, to watch Lucas play, to see what Amelia did that made a hurt little boy laugh like he had never been abandoned. And when he saw Lucas sitting in her lap on the couch, coloring a picture of a motherfish and her baby, he realized something deep inside him had just thawed. "Ethan, have you ever been afraid of getting too attached to someone?" Amelia looked up at him, still cradling the sleeping boy. "I used to be, but now I'm more afraid of not being needed." "I need you." Ethan's voice was barely audible, as if he couldn't stop it from coming out. "Not because I'm short a housekeeper, but because Lucas needs you, and I don't know how to love anymore." The room went completely still. Then Amelia replied without turning away, "Then don't start by loving. Start by staying." Ethan hated not knowing. He ran a multi-million-dollar company, controlled every variable, every risk. To him, anything unclear was a threat, whether it was a vague clause in a contract, a half-truth in a conversation, or a woman who'd entered his son's life in the most unexpected way. Amelia Rose, the name didn't appear in any database he knew. No profiles on professional networks, no university degrees, no news articles, no scandals, no remarkable biography, just a series of short-term scattered jobs: supermarket clerk, part-time babysitter, kitchen assistant, and house cleaner. Ethan sat in his office, eyes on the report his assistant had just sent over. Amelia Rose, born 1998, orphan young, raised at Briar Hill Home in New Jersey, studied early childhood education at a community college at 19, dropped out in her second year. Foster mother died of kidney failure. No money to return to school, has done manual labor ever since. No criminal record, no credit debt, no insurance, no marriage. No one really knows who she is. A resume so clean it was almost invisible. No noise, no demands. And strangely, that made Ethan uneasy. That morning when he stepped out of his bedroom, the first thing he heard wasn't the staff's footsteps or the chime of his phone. It was the sound of Lucas laughing. He followed the laughter into the living room and found his son sitting cross-legged on the floor, his mouth covered in cookie crumbs. Amelia sat across from him, gently wiping his face with a wet wipe, chuckling as she told some ridiculous story about a cat named Professor Whiskers who gave lectures to pigeons. Lucas giggled, his eyes sparkling like a freshly unwrapped candy. Ethan stood silently in the doorway, struck by something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. When had his son's laughter stopped feeling fragile, like it might vanish at any second? When had a quiet morning become something he hoped for? During breakfast, as Amelia poured milk into Lucas's cup, Ethan spoke without thinking. "Why do you think the boy chose you?" Amelia looked up, not surprised, almost like she'd been waiting for that question. She smiled, not a polite, forced smile, an honest one. "Maybe because I'm not afraid of a child's tears." She paused, her eyes meeting his directly. "I used to survive on them." Ethan froze, not because of her words, but because of the truth beneath them, raw and unspoken. His chest tightened, like someone had pressed down on a place he thought had long turned to stone. That day, Ethan didn't go to work. He took Lucas to school for the first time in nearly a year. The boy didn't resist, didn't cry. He just turned back and waved at Amelia 3 times before walking through the gate. She stood beside Ethan, eyes warm and steady. "He's never waved like that before," Ethan murmured. Maybe because, before, he wasn't sure anyone would still be there when he looked back. That evening in the quiet kitchen, Amelia was washing dishes when Ethan stepped in. They didn't speak for a few minutes, just the sound of water and clinking dishes. Then he asked, "Are you ever afraid, living this way, with no one remembering your name?" Amelia set the plate down, dried her hands, and leaned lightly against the counter. "It's okay if no one remembers my name, as long as I remember the people I've helped. A smile, a hug, a child who stops crying for me. That's enough to feel like I exist." Ethan turned away, not letting her see his eyes of someone who had just realized that existing and living were 2 very different things. Later that night, Lucas slept soundly, clutching his teddy bear, murmuring in his sleep, "Miss Leah is a princess." Ethan stood outside the door, listening, motionless. He'd heard his son call doctors strangers, had seen him scream when a nurse touched his shoulder. But with Amelia, after only 2 weeks, Lucas called her the light in the middle of his darkness. Ethan returned to his office and opened her file again. The only photo attached was a blurry ID picture, hair tied back, eyes staring straight ahead. And in those eyes were more wounds than any resume could ever capture. For the first time in years, Ethan typed something on his personal computer, not a report, not a business email. He wrote, "Amelia Rose, the woman with no record, but she carries something this busy world desperately lacks, the courage to stay beside a wound." The afternoon light filtered through sheer curtains, scattering like golden dust across the dark wooden floor. In the quiet room, Lucas sat alone, clutching a colored pencil, eyes fixed on a blank sheet of paper. Amelia walked in, ready to call him to dinner, but stopped short when she saw the scribbles in front of him. It wasn't a fish, not the sun or houses like usual. It was a man in black, arms outstretched, pushing a woman out of the frame. The woman had long hair, and by her feet, a child was crying. Amelia knelt down, gently placing her hand on Lucas's shoulder. "This drawing, whose story is it, sweetheart?" Lucas didn't answer. He gripped the crayon tighter, his hand trembling. A long pause, then a whisper so faint it was barely there. "That's Mommy." Amelia's breath caught. "And the man?" Lucas didn't reply. He bit his lip, eyes welling up with tears. But he didn't cry. He only whispered, as if afraid to hear it himself. "I don't remember the face, but I remember the feeling." That night, Amelia stood at the sink, washing dishes, but her mind kept drifting back to the drawing. A weight pressed down in her chest. A child couldn't draw a fear they hadn't seen or lived. When Ethan returned, she waited until Lucas was asleep to gather the courage to speak. "Have you ever considered that Victoria's disappearance wasn't just her leaving?" Ethan looked up from his glass of wine. "What are you implying?" "Lucas is carrying a fear he can't name, but he remembers. His body remembers, and he's signaling it, only no one stopped to listen." Ethan set the glass down. His eyes darkened, pulled toward a memory he clearly didn't want. "Victoria left 2 years ago. No explanation. She left nothing behind but a short letter and my son." "And you believe that's the whole story?" "I believe what I saw." Amelia sat across from him. Her gaze wasn't soft, but it wasn't attacking either. "And Lucas? What does he see every night in his sleepwalking? In the hiding? In those drawings you don't want to really look at? Ethan gripped the edge of his chair. His voice came low, nearly hoarse. Are you suggesting I did something to Victoria? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just saying, maybe you don't know the whole story, and Lucas needs help. I don't believe in people who dig into your mind. They don't help. They just make you remember what should be forgotten. Amelia looked at him for a long time. Then she answered not to argue, but simply to state the truth. Wounds that aren't opened don't heal. They fester, and someday, they explode. Ethan didn't respond. He turned away as he often did when conversations slipped beyond his control. But that night, he didn't sleep. He lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, haunted by that drawing, every shaky line, every shadow pushing the woman out of a child's world. The next morning, Amelia didn't see Ethan in the kitchen like usual. She was about to ask when Lucas tugged on her hand. Daddy's not going to work today. Oh, then where is he? He's looking for something in Mommy's room. Amelia frowned. Quietly, she walked toward the room that had always remained locked, Victoria's room. Ethan was inside, surrounded by papers, wedding photos, old letters. He sat on the floor, sleeves rolled up, his face drained and weary. In his hand was an unopened envelope still sealed with red wax. The name scrawled on it read, "For Ethan, don't hate me." Amelia said nothing. She simply sat beside him. In that dusty, faded space, something was shifting slowly, like the first crack in a frozen lake. Ethan didn't open the letter right away, but for the first time, he spoke not as a billionaire, but as a former husband. Victoria leaving was partly because of me. If she was ever scared, if she ever felt backed into a corner, maybe it was partly because of me. Not because you meant to hurt her, but because you never let anyone get close enough to see you hurt. Ethan turned to look at her. And you? Why did you get close? Amelia gave a quiet smile. Because I know what it feels like, to stand outside a door no one opens. Still following the story? If this story found you outside of Soul Stories, we invite you home, to where every touching tale begins with truth, hope, and heart. In a room steeped in memories, soft light filtered through a dusty window. No one spoke for a long time. Ethan sat there, leaning against a dark wooden cabinet, an unopened letter still in his hand. Amelia sat beside him, legs tucked in, arms wrapped around her knees, eyes gazing into an invisible space ahead. The ticking of the wall clock echoed steadily, the only rhythm in a place where time seemed to stand still. After a while, it was Amelia who broke the silence, her voice soft, gentle, but not weak. I used to think I'd get used to not being needed, but turns out no one really gets used to that feeling. Ethan tilted his head slightly toward her, his gaze softening, not cold, not controlling, just present. I grew up in Briar Hill Orphanage. It wasn't bad. There was a bed, food, people who looked after us, but at night, that's when I was the most afraid. The other kids cried. I stayed silent. I was afraid that if I cried, no one would hear me. And even worse, what if someone did hear me, but still didn't come? Her voice lowered. Her hand tightened around her knee. I used to wish, just once, that when I cried, someone would come and hold me. Not say much, just say, "Sweetheart, you're okay. I'm here with you." Ethan didn't say anything, but his eyes never left her. Amelia smiled faintly, her gaze far away. And then she came, my adoptive mom, a tiny woman with reading glasses, always making soup that was way too salty. She didn't pick me because I was special. She picked me because I was the quiet one in the corner nobody looked at. She opened her arms, held me, and for the first time, I felt like I had a place to call home. Nothing in this world has ever felt more precious than that embrace. Her voice trembled. But then, she got sick, kidney failure, had to go on dialysis 3 times a week. I dropped out of school and worked everywhere I could. It wasn't enough. And in the end, she passed. On a winter morning, I didn't even get to say goodbye. Ethan looked down at the floor, silent, as if swallowing something thick in his throat. Amelia drew in a breath and continued. Since then, I stopped crying. But when I saw Lucas, When I saw him sitting alone, hiding his face in the cupboard, clinging to me like I was the only place he felt safe, I couldn't walk away, especially when you told me to go. And then called me back just for his sake. I couldn't say no because I know that feeling, having something and then losing it. It leaves a hole nothing else can fill. Ethan lowered his head. His dark hair fell across his forehead, shadowing his eyes. And you, Amelia asked gently without pressure, did you really love Victoria? A long pause, then Ethan replied, his voice low and hoarse. Yes, I loved her, but it was the kind of love from someone who never learned how to love the right way. He tapped lightly on the envelope with his fingers. I grew up in a family where emotions had no place. Everything had to be right, perfect. My father ran his company like a military unit, and I was his most loyal soldier. I controlled everything. And when I loved, I brought that same habit with me. He turned to Amelia. His eyes were unguarded now. Victoria lived with her heart. She was all about art, freedom, unpredictability. She loved me, at least in the beginning. But slowly, I started to control every choice she made. What she wore, where she went, who she saw, how much time she spent with Lucas. I thought I was protecting the family, but in truth, I was caging it. Amelia listened quietly without judgment, just sitting there, present like the silence they both needed. And then she left, Ethan continued. I woke up one autumn morning and Victoria was gone. No suitcase, no tears, no sound, just a letter and our 3-year-old son asleep on the bed. He leaned his head back, eyes to the ceiling, as if hiding from something inside himself. The first 3 months, I had no idea what to do with Lucas. I hired nannies, therapists, even child behavior specialists. But the more I tried, the more he shut down. He wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat, wouldn't look anyone in the eye. And I was empty. I could close an $80 million deal over lunch, but I couldn't get my son to say, I'm okay. His voice cracked on those last 2 words, a small fracture in a wall built over a lifetime. Amelia placed her hand lightly on the floor, near his fingers, but didn't touch him. Ethan lowered his head and let out a quiet, self-deprecating laugh. Then you showed up. He lifted his gaze, looking straight at her, for the first time, without retreat, without armor. And within days, Lucas laughed, said names, drew pictures, hugged someone without shaking. You did what the entire paid world couldn't do. You came asking for nothing, no contract, no demands. You just stayed. Their eyes met, not fiery, not dramatic, but quiet, like the last note of a symphony played after a storm. Amelia smiled softly. Maybe. I needed to stay just as much as Lucas did. The evening breeze stirred through the cracked window. The curtain shifted, and in that moment, no words were spoken, but both of them knew something had changed forever. Not a rushed love, not a grand promise, but the feeling, for the first time in their lives, of someone sitting beside them and not leaving. And sometimes that alone is enough. Late winter in New York wrapped everything in a thin layer of mist, cold and damp. That morning, Amelia was carefully drying the windowsill when she heard a sharp, broken gasp from the bedroom. Lucas. She ran in. The boy was curled up under the covers, face flushed, sweat beading on his forehead, lips dry, his body burning hot. Ethan had an important meeting in Boston that day. Amelia grabbed a cool towel to wipe his forehead, searched the apartment for a thermometer, fever medicine, and cold compresses. When she saw the number 100, 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit, her heart dropped. The boy mumbled something in his sleep, unclear, but the last word she caught was, Mom, don't go. Amelia didn't sleep that night. She sat at the edge of the bed, one hand resting on the boy's forehead, whispering fairy tales. Not about princesses or knights, but about a little sparrow living alone on a rooftop. Each day, the sparrow sang a song no one ever heard. Until one rainy day, a lost kitten came seeking shelter. The sparrow gave up its nest, even its voice, just so the kitten could sleep peacefully. Lucas didn't say a word, but his small hand clung gently to her finger all night long. Ethan came home close to 4 in the morning. His flight had been delayed due to snow, his phone died, his assistant couldn't reach him. The entire trip had left him irritated and tense, but all of that vanished the moment the penthouse door opened and he saw the soft light coming from his son's room. He stepped inside and froze. Amelia was seated beside the bed, leaning slightly forward, head resting against the pillow, still wearing her coat. Lucas lay curled in her arms, his face calmer, cheeks pink, breath steady. His tiny hand gripped her finger like a lifeline. The room was silent, wrapped in a kind of warmth. And Ethan, a man who had always seen silence as a threat, suddenly found that, for the first time, he wanted to stay. He didn't wake them. He simply took out his phone and snapped a photo a moment he knew. He'd need to remind himself that it really happened. The next morning, Amelia woke to the scent of coffee drifting from the kitchen, a strange occurrence, since she was always the one who brewed it before Ethan got up. She stepped out, hair slightly tousled, coat draped loosely over her shoulder. Ethan stood by the espresso machine, shirt sleeves rolled up, holding 2 paper cups. When he saw her, he held one out a silent good morning. "Thanks for last night," he said, voice low. Amelia took the cup, her fingers brushing against his just briefly, but enough to notice the contrast. His hand, cold, hers, warm. "Lucas is fine now. Probably just a seasonal fever," she replied, trying to keep her tone even. Ethan didn't respond right away. He looked at her like he'd done many times before, but this time, his gaze seemed to search for something within her, something he'd long believed was lost. "Do you know," he began, then paused, took a breath. "You made me feel something I forgot a long time ago." Amelia tilted her head. "What's that?" "Peace of mind." Just 2 words. But for Ethan Hawke, a man who had signed hundreds of insurance contracts, hired bodyguards even for his private balcony, drafted a will at 27, peace of mind was something no money could buy. They sat together in silence, each holding a cup of coffee, as if that early morning wasn't between 2 strangers, but 2 broken pieces quietly trying to find where they might fit. Lucas woke up, hair tousled, walked into the living room clutching his teddy bear. He looked at Ethan, then at Amelia. Then without a word, he crawled straight into her lap, bearing his face into her chest like it was home. Ethan smiled faintly, and for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like he was standing outside looking in, but like he truly wanted to be part of that small, warm circle. The warm birthday party in the small garden behind the penthouse was something Ethan had never imagined could happen. No reception staff, no flashy backdrop, no luxurious lights, just a long oak table, a few dozen cupcakes Amelia had baked herself, and Lucas laughing joyfully among his classmates. Amelia wore a pale blue dress, her hair tied simply, but in Ethan's eyes she was the gentle center everything revolved around. Not because she tried to be, but because she always knew how to be there, just enough to make people feel at peace. Lucas wrapped his arms around her and held up a drawing made with crayons. "Miss Leah, I drew us. You know what? This is the first picture I didn't color with sad colors." She laughed. Ethan stood nearby, quietly watching. And in that moment, he truly believed he was somewhere called home. But no one expected the storm that was coming. A black car slid to a stop in front of the villa. The door opened. A woman stepped out, blonde curls, a tight white dress, and eyes as cold as the early winter wind. Victoria, the ex-wife, the mother who had left her son 2 years ago. Ethan froze. Lucas stopped in his tracks. Victoria approached, her gaze brushing past Ethan and landing on Amelia, lingering just long enough to chill the air around them. "I heard," her voice was light, as if making polite conversation over tea, "my son has been calling another woman Mom." No one responded. "I was wrong to leave," she continued, glancing at Lucas, her voice faltering. "But I was never given the chance to come back. I used to be the only one he had. Now he doesn't need me anymore. And I can't just stand by." She turned to Ethan, lifting her chin slightly. "I'm here to take my son home." Ethan could hardly believe what he was hearing. "Victoria, you disappeared. 2 years, not a single word. And now you come back and demand him like..." He's something you forgot to pack. I'm his biological mother, Victoria said firmly, though her eyes had started to tremble. And if you don't give him to me, I'll take legal action. Lucas couldn't take it anymore. He backed away, then turned and ran crawling straight under the garden table, where the tablecloth hung down like a cocoon. Everyone fell silent. No one said a word. Only the sound of Lucas's quick, shaky breathing came from beneath the table. Then Amelia stepped forward. She didn't speak, didn't ask, didn't try to reassure with words. She simply knelt down and gently crawled under the table, her dress catching on the chair legs, her knees brushing the cold grass, her head lowering to meet Lucas at eye level. She didn't hug him, didn't try to pull him out. She just held out her hand, palm open, waiting. Lucas trembled for a few seconds, then placed his tiny hand in hers, a small, pale hand, but warm enough to melt through panic. Ethan stood at a distance, watching. And a tear fell. No sobbing, no dramatic breakdown. Just a single tear slipping down the face of a man who thought he'd been numb for far too long. He hadn't cried during the divorce. Not when Victoria disappeared, not when Lucas got sick from night terrors. But in that moment, watching his son find safety in the hands of a woman who held no title of mother, he knew what was real. Victoria saw everything. She couldn't call out to Lucas, couldn't take a step closer. She only whispered, "Lucas," then backed away. No one asked her to leave. She walked away in silence, just as she had once vanished from the child's life. That night, Amelia was folding up the tablecloth when Ethan approached. He no longer looked like a millionaire, just a father, a man learning how to open his heart again. "Amelia." She looked up, still composed, though her eyes were red from emotion. "I wasn't trying to replace anyone," she said first. Ethan shook his head. "I know." He stepped closer, his voice low and rough. "I don't need a wife to show up at parties. I need someone my son can call home." Amelia gave a soft, bittersweet smile. "What if I've never been a home to anyone?" Ethan replied, his voice deep and steady. "Then let me be the foundation, and the rest we'll build with trust." The morning after the birthday party was abruptly interrupted. The air inside the penthouse felt thick and heavy. Lucas was still asleep. He lay curled up on the sofa, hugging his teddy bear, eyelids slightly swollen. Amelia sat beside him, one hand resting on his back, the other holding an open book. But her eyes weren't on the pages, they were fixed on the hallway, where Ethan had disappeared behind the office door the night before. He hadn't said a word after Victoria left. He had simply walked into the room and locked the door. Around noon, when Amelia knocked gently, the door opened and Ethan sat at his desk, dark circles under his eyes, cheeks a little sunken. In front of him lay a thin, worn file, divorce papers. "You want to know why Victoria left?" he said, his voice hoarse, eyes not meeting hers. "She said I was cold, emotionless, that I pressured her into having a child when she wasn't ready." Amelia stepped inside, listening in silence. "She wasn't wrong. I am that kind of person. I thought, if I built a perfect family, had a well-behaved son, a respectable wife, I would stop feeling so empty." He turned the pen slowly between his fingers, eyes staring past the wall. "I loved her, in the way someone who's been abandoned learns to love, by controlling. I had a prenuptial agreement drafted just in case everything fell apart, so I wouldn't be hurt too badly. She signed it." He gave a bitter, dry laugh, like mocking himself. "But I never realized how scared she really was. Then Lucas was born, and she wasn't ready. I thought time would help her love being a mother. But..." Amelia slowly walked over and sat beside the desk. She didn't interrupt, didn't judge. Ethan lowered his head. "I never expected she would walk away when the boy was just 3. The silence was so deep they could hear the ticking of the wall clock. "Did you ever get an explanation?" Amelia asked softly. Ethan shook his head. "Just the divorce papers sent through her lawyer. One letter I found afterward, but I've never had the courage to open it. No texts, no calls." She remembered when she was looking for medicine for Lucas. She had seen that box. Inside was a cream-colored envelope, sealed with red wax, trimmed with silver thread, yellowed slightly with age. Is it? She stood, walked over, and pulled out the envelope. This one? Ethan looked up. He nodded. Slanted handwriting read, "For Ethan, don't hate me." I never opened it, he whispered. I was afraid it would make me hate her more. Maybe, Amelia said gently, handing it to him. It wasn't written for you to hate. Maybe it was written for you to let go. Ethan held the envelope, opening it slowly, like unlocking a door that had been shut for years. The letter inside was short, not as long as he'd imagined. No complicated explanations, like the excuses he'd heard in so many divorce trials. The handwriting was fine, but firm. No trembling, no lies. Ethan, I know you won't forgive me, and maybe you don't need to, but I'm writing this letter not to ask for forgiveness, but to say what I never had the courage to say out loud. I tried to be a good wife, tried to learn how to be a mother, tried to love our child the way people said I should, but I was never truly ready. When I looked at Lucas, I saw responsibility, pressure, not because of him, but because of me. I felt like I was acting a part unlike you, who could control everything. I couldn't. I was afraid, Ethan, afraid I'd hurt him, afraid I'd become a terrible mother. And when that fear grew too big, I chose to run. You'll hate me, and maybe you should. But if one day Lucas finds someone who truly chooses to stay, who dares to love him with heart, not just title, please, let that person do what I couldn't. I didn't have the courage to be a mother, but maybe someone out there will. Ethan folded the letter, his hands slightly shaking, his eyes closed tight. Maybe for the first time in 2 years, he understood. No more anger, no more blame, just a sadness that felt deeply human. Amelia didn't speak. She simply placed her hand on the desk, close to his but not touching. Just close enough for him to know. He wasn't carrying this alone. Ethan opened his eyes, looked at her, for the first time, with silent gratitude. She left, but you stayed. Thank you. I didn't come to replace anyone, Amelia said quietly. I just couldn't turn away from a child who needed someone, the same way I once did. It was drizzling that morning. Not a heavy downpour, just a soft patter of raindrops against the windows, like a gentle, wordless melody. Everything inside the penthouse seemed to slow down. No clacking keyboards, no ringing phones. Ethan had turned off all his schedule notifications, letting the world outside move on without his control. Lucas sat on the carpet, coloring a picture in blue, yellow, and orange. A house, a man, a woman, and a child. He colored with great care. Amelia walked in, still holding a cleaning cloth. As she bent to pick up a crayon that had rolled away, Lucas looked up, his eyes unexpectedly serious. Miss Leah? Amelia paused. She was used to hearing him call her that soft, affectionate, but always with an invisible line in between. What is it, kiddo? Lucas held up the drawing to her. At the top, in wobbly handwriting, he had written, My family. Amelia looked at the drawing, then at Lucas. Before she could say a word, the boy stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her waist, a hug stronger than he'd ever given. Mom. Just one word, software, but enough to shatter Amelia's heart into 1,000 pieces and heal it at the same time. She froze. Her throat tightened. The air around her stopped moving. Every memory that once hurt the afternoons spent waiting for someone who never came. The curled-up nights in the orphanage. The countless times she'd watched other children call someone Mom, all of it, seemed to melt away inside that tiny embrace. And then her tears fell. Not out of sadness, but because for the first time in her life, she had been chosen. Ethan stood at the end of the hallway, witnessing everything. He didn't come closer. He just watched. The light from the window cast across half his face, revealing a quiet emotion he couldn't hide, a kind of tenderness, honesty, and gratitude that didn't need words. When Lucas ran into the other room to grab more crayons, leaving Amelia standing alone, Ethan finally stepped forward. He stopped in front of her. For a moment, he said nothing. I was wrong, he said at last, his voice low, no longer proud or guarded, only real. Wrong to think I could build a family with papers, discipline, and schedules. Wrong to believe love was a luxury and to be afraid? Amelia didn't look up. She was still fighting her tears, but her voice was soft. You're not the only one who was afraid. Ethan gently reached out and took her hand for the first time. He was the one to initiate it. But if you're willing, maybe we can rewrite everything. Amelia looked down at his hand. The hand of a man who once held on to everything too tightly, his wealth, his power, his pain, and now was opening, asking for nothing but a chance to be close. She shook her head slightly, not to say no. I don't think I deserve it. Ethan started to speak, but it was Lucas calling from the room who spoke for him, with the voice of a 5-year-old boy whose heart had learned how to choose. I didn't pick my mom by blood. I picked her with my heart. That sentence was like a blessing. Amelia burst into tears, but this time she didn't hide them. Ethan stepped forward and pulled her into a hug, not tight, not rushed. Just a hug, like he had waited his whole life to rest in a heartbeat that wasn't his own. And then he leaned down and kissed her soft, tender, and true. Not the kiss of possession, not one to fill loneliness, but a kiss between two people who had once been broken and now chose each other to build again. A year isn't long, but it's enough for everything to change so much that even those living it feel surprised when they look back. Amelia was no longer the girl in a worn coat walking through cold hallways, cleaning corners of an apartment she never believed would be hers. Now she was the director of a small center called Willow and Heart, a place for orphans and single mothers searching for a new foundation. The building was only 3 stories high, painted a soft cream, tucked between 2 busy streets in South Brooklyn. There were no flashy signs, no loud slogans, just a small wooden plaque by the door. We don't ask where you came from, only what you need today. And every weekend, a 6-year-old boy with tousled brown hair would appear at the entrance with his backpack, worn backward, and a bag of homemade cookies, shouting, "Mom, I'm here!" Lucas, still the boy who loved to draw, who clung to his teddy bear, but now he shared his snacks with friends, comforted kids when they cried, and most importantly, knew that Mom would always be waiting at the end of the day. Ethan had changed too. From a cold, calculating CEO of a real estate empire, he had become co-founder of the Silent Hands Foundation, an organization that provided financial support to women who had quietly cared for children in often overlooked roles: nannies, preschool teachers, kitchen workers, pediatric nurses. Not everyone is born to do something extraordinary, Ethan once said at a press conference. But there are hands that silently keep the world from falling apart. They deserve to be remembered. That idea came from Amelia, from the way she knelt beside Lucas on the floor, from the way she listened patiently, clearing out the cluttered corners of 2 broken hearts, not with credentials, but with a heart that refused to run. The foundation's first fundraiser was held on an early autumn evening. A large room in the art museum had been decorated with paintings created by the children from Amelia's center. One of them was Lucas's, a blue house, open windows, and 3 people sitting together eating cookies. Amelia stood backstage, her hand gently wrapped around a microphone. She'd never liked being on stage. The lights were too bright for her, but tonight she wouldn't speak. Ethan would speak for her. He stepped up to the podium, wearing a simple gray suit without a tie. His face still held the same quiet confidence, but his eyes were no longer cold, no longer distant. They were full of trust. He looked toward Amelia. She smiled, placing a hand over her chest as if trying to hold still a heart that had just skipped a beat. I used to think I didn't need anyone, that if I just kept everything under control, I wouldn't get hurt. Then I had a child, and my wife left. I thought I could carry it all. I thought I was strong enough. Until one day, a woman walked into my home. No fancy degree, no impressive resume, no title. She didn't teach me how to love. She just stayed long enough, gently enough, quietly enough for me to learn it myself. The woman I love once cleaned my house. Now she's cleaning the wounds of hundreds of children's hearts. And if anyone ever asks me what made a man change his life, then I will answer. It was the patience of a heart that didn't run away. The entire room rose in applause, but Amelia didn't walk onto the stage. She walked over to Lucas, who was standing near his painting, and wrapped him in her arms. Didn't your dad look cool up there? She whispered. I saw him looking at you more than at the crowd, Lucas whispered back. So, maybe you're the cool one. They both laughed. That night, when the event ended, Ethan, Amelia, and Lucas walked hand in hand across the small bridge connecting two neighborhoods. Lucas ran ahead, singing a made-up song only he understood, while the two adults strolled behind him. The breeze brushed gently through the trees. Ethan slid his fingers into Amelia's, the same hand that once scrubbed his floors, that once held his terrified son, and now held his, like a quiet answer to an unspoken question. Thank you, he said softly. For what? For not asking whether I deserved any of this. For just staying. You're watching Soul Stories, exclusive to our channel. If you're still with us, drop a comment. We read and cherish them all. Subscribe to support more heartfelt original stories. Thanks for being part of the Soul Stories family. The Sunday afternoon park was bathed in soft golden sunlight. Maple leaves drifted slowly to the ground, as if trying to hold on to autumn before it slipped away. Children's laughter echoed in the fresh air, mingling with the crunch of bicycle wheels over gravel and the whisper of wind through the trees. Lucas rode his sky-blue bicycle, the one Ethan had given him for his 6th birthday, with irrepressible excitement. He shouted out, "Mom, look, no training wheels anymore." Amelia sat on a wooden bench beneath a tree, smiling as she watched. Ethan stood beside her, hands in his pockets, eyes never leaving his son. He's stubborn just like you, he said gently, and like you, in the way he looks at something he really wants to hold on to. Ethan tilted his head slightly, about to respond, but then, crash, the sound of a toppled bike, a startled scream, then crying. Lucas lay sprawled on the narrow sidewalk, one knee scraped open, blood mixing with dust and tears. Amelia didn't think, she just ran. She dropped to her knees and lifted him up, hands trembling but tender. Lucas cried harder, burying his face in her chest, sobbing in hiccuped bursts. It's okay, it's okay. Mommy's here. I'm right here, she whispered, dabbing at the blood with her sleeve. Ethan rushed over and knelt beside them, pulling out the small first aid kit he always kept in his backpack. But Lucas wouldn't let him touch. The boy clung to Amelia, arms locked tight. It hurts, Mommy. Amelia placed her hand over his chest, where his heart beat fast and wild. You know something, Lucas, she said softly. Being a mother doesn't mean you gave birth to someone. She looked up, straight at Ethan. The breeze caught her hair, lifting it gently. Her voice wasn't loud, wasn't shaky, just steady, like a vow. Being a mother means you can't walk away from someone who needs you. Ethan froze. For a moment, every memory from the past year came flooding in like waves, Amelia crouching under the table with Lucas, the nights she sat up during fevers, the laughter during drawing time, the quiet dinners that needed no tough exterior. He set the bandage aside. Not because it wasn't needed, but because what Lucas needed more than anything was an embrace. Ethan leaned in, wrapping his arms around both of them. Blood, tears, and all the things that once felt impossible to mend. No words, just a hug. But that hug was enough to melt an entire lifetime of coldness. That night, a light rain fell. Lucas had long since fallen asleep, his tiny hands still holding both his parents' hands, like he feared that if he let go, the world might slip back into its old silence. Amelia started to rise to get a blanket, but Ethan gently caught her hand. Wait! His voice was low, a little hoarse. He was looking at her like she was the only real thing in the room. What is it? She whispered, careful not to wake the boy. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then from the inside pocket of his jacket, he pulled out a small box, not velvet-lined, not gold-trimmed. Just a simple dark wooden box, a little worn, like the kind of love that had survived a long journey. Amelia's eyes widened. Ethan opened the box. The ring inside wasn't extravagant, but on the inside of the band, there was a tiny engraving. Home is a choice. I don't know how to propose the right way, he said, his voice raw with truth. I just know, every time you walk into a room, everything inside it feels calmer. Even me. He leaned forward a little, eyes still on hers. I don't need a lavish wedding. I just want to wake up next to you every day. To be the one standing beside you when Lucas starts first grade, second grade, or when he brings home his first girlfriend. Will you marry me? Amelia bit her lip. She looked at the ring, then at Lucas fast asleep, his tiny hands still scraped from earlier that day. And then she smiled, a teary, radiant smile that felt like a new season blooming in her heart. Yes, she whispered, because home isn't where you live, it's where you choose not to leave. Ethan kissed her, not urgently, not desperately, just a kiss like a thank you for choosing to stay when the rest of the world once turned its back.